Okay, welcome back. So Professor's just going to continue for 5 more minutes and then we'll move on to questions.
No, let's have questions.
Okay, we'll start with questions from the morning lecture. So any questions or comments? Mary, did you have a question? Okay. No questions? Alex?
So if you have I like this bit about gold, why gold is unique because it has the slowest falling marginal utility. That's why smart traders are using it as a medium of exchange. But isn't one of the basis of subjective economics that we all have our own specific preference sets, and that they aren't comparable? So how can we infer, based on everybody's different non-comparable preference sets, that everybody definitely has the slowest falling marginal utility of extra gold? It seems to violate the sort of basis of subjective economics. Is it a reconcile?
The answer to your question is that marginal utility is not a concept associated with the individual. Utility is. So the utility of gold to you could be very well different from the utility of gold to me or to anybody else. But marginal utility is like taking averages. It's not taking averages. And as you know, there are arithmetic means, there are geometric means, there are harmonic means, all kinds of means. And marginal utility is very special. None of these, has nothing to do with arithmetic mean or geometric mean, any other, but marginal utility is the utility to the marginal player. So you survey all economic players and put them in, or rank them according to their utility, how they value gold. From those who value it very little, and to the other end, to those who value it very, very highly. So there's a spectrum of people, one after the other, and so on. Now, there is going to be a marginal actor among this. And the marginal actor is the one who is making the exchange just now. And the next moment it could be another guy, but there is a marginal actor at any moment of time. And the marginal utility of gold is the utility of gold to that particular marginal actor. It's not a fixed person, but it's always just one person. Okay? And it would vary. It would vary. Sometimes it would tend to the left, sometimes it would tend to the right. But there is always one marginal actor. And marginal utility is impersonal because it refers to the utility of just one person, not considering the others, just the one at any moment of time. And that's a very common mistake. People think that marginal utility is something which you have and he has and she has and everybody else has. No, it's just the utility of gold to that person who happens to be making the exchange at this moment. The next moment it will be another one. Or another one. Or it could be that the same person represents the marginal utility for a length of time. It could be. But it doesn't have to be. So that is my answer to your question. We will come to that when we discuss concepts like marginal productivity or marginal time preference, and it works the same way. It's not that your marginal time preference is different from another person's. No. Your time preference is different. But marginal is taking an average in quotation mark, because it's not average in the ordinary sense. It's average in the sense that at every moment there is one whose decision is influencing the outcome.
Keith?
I don't understand why Mises said if gold has a non-declining marginal utility, then that means that it has infinite demand. That seems like just a mistake.
Mises' mistake.
Yeah. Why does that mean demand is infinite? Where did it come from?
Well, it comes from this idea that he takes it as an axiom that marginal utility is declining regardless. Everything. It's a universal law with no exception. Gold is no exception. Silver is no exception. There are no exceptions, period. That he takes as an axiom. Now, if you do take it as an axiom, does it not follow that the demand would have to be infinite?
I must be missing it.
Yeah. Well, think about it. I have thought it over, and at that time my conclusion was that if I accept Mises' axiom, then it does follow. It does follow that demand will have to be infinite. And that's a contradiction, because in practice there is no infinite demand.
And if you think about it as a flat supply curve instead of a slope, it never changes.
Oh, if you're in his supply-demand curve thing, okay.
Yeah, that's right. And Mises does, but he criticizes it too. So Mises is way above the classical and neoclassical thinkers, because he is always aware that concepts such as supply, demand, equilibrium are crutches. They help us through various theoretical difficulties, but they are crutches still, a kind of aid to thought, imperfect as they may be. He always admits that. But for some reason, he doesn't say that we don't need these crutches, because we had a Karl Menger, who gave us much better than crutches. He gave us the idea of Absatzfähigkeit. And out of this comes a price theory with bid price as price. No equilibrium is needed. You can throw it out. No more. I mean, early on we needed it because we needed crutches. We didn't see clearly. But now, with the help of Karl Menger, we don't need crutches anymore. Now, that's my personal interpretation. And please remember this, because you will meet a lot of people, good people, Austrians, who studied Menger as well, Mises and so on, and they would not agree with me. They would say, no, we still need crutches. Such as another concept is the evenly rotating economy. That's a concept of Mises. And Mises admits that it's a crutch, helping. So, that is my personal interpretation, that we don't need the crutch of equilibrium and supply and demand, because we have Menger's very great insight, marketability, closely related concept is liquidity. And then there is hoardability and all these. So once Menger broke the ice, we have a great deal of concepts to choose from, and none of them would qualify as crutches because it's a real thing. It's just this description of reality as it is.
Alex?
Yeah, if nobody else has a question, I'd like to continue addressing because I don't feel I'm not satisfied. Because the explanation is good. You said that Mises didn't explain why people use gold as the medium of exchange well. But then you said, no, it's because it has the slowest falling marginal utility. But we can, how, I don't think that you can use the same method by basically stating that people have unique preference sets and then come to the conclusion that everybody's marginal preference for gold is the slowest falling out of every good in comparison to gold. So I'm explaining it poorly, that there's no other commodity that has a slower falling marginal utility. I don't think that is a sound claim. Is that a fair?
I don't think so.
No?
I tell you why. Because you see, we talk about subjective economics, which is that the emphasis was shifted from these mechanical metaphors such as equilibrium and supply and demand and so on to the preferences of individuals. And that's an axiom that individuals have different preferences. No two, just like you don't have two identical eggs, you will have no two persons with identical preferences. That's a nonsense. It's a contradiction in terms. But the fact that we talk about modern subjective economics doesn't mean that objective occurrences are completely absent and we cannot talk about them. Because we have to. How can you measure? I mean, if we did not have a way back from subjectivism to objectivism, if we burnt bridges, we crossed over from objective to subjective, say, never ever again go back, burn the bridges, don't need it, then you would lose the facility of measuring value, measuring interest, measuring prices, whatever. So the way I satisfy myself that it's an interplay between objective and subjective rather than a radical subjectivism, denying everything that is objective, is this: that with concepts such as marginalism, okay, they talk about marginal revolution, started by Menger. Okay, so there is marginalism as a methodology. Okay, marginalism. Now, marginalism I think of as a way to go back to objective ideas for the purpose of measurement and making quantitative statement. You see, the individual, the subject is qualitative because all comparisons are qualitative comparisons. Not all, but in this context, subjective economics means that we are looking at the individual and his or her preferences and choices and describe economic events in these terms. But we should not refuse to look at things objectively as well. And if we can, then we should introduce objective ideas for the purpose of measuring. And that is one example. Marginal utility of gold is one good example that although all human valuations are subjective, but when it comes to gold, it goes back to objective. I mean, there is no this is not a subjective statement to say that the marginal utility of gold declines at a slower rate than that of anything else. Because that's a fact. You like it or you dislike it, but that's a fact. And if you want to act, you've got to accept it. If you reject it, you are going to suffer for it sooner or later. This is not a fact you can dismiss. Okay.
Can I just add one thing to that? If you look at gold stocks to flows, you can compare that to the stocks to flows of any other commodity. The other thing you can look at is the bid-ask spread on gold and compare that to any other commodity. Both of those are confirming the same claim that gold has either a non-declining marginal utility or a marginal utility that declines the least.
I think it's a very satisfying explanation. And also, if you introduce the idea that gold is the most marketable good, you can use to buy anything else, then you could say that it has a much more sort of utility, or would probably have a much slower declining utility than any other good, because it can be used to buy any other good.
It's money.
So I'm satisfied with it. Thank you.
Are you satisfied?
Yes. Rudy?
Just to sum up what you're saying, you have to translate everyone's individual value scale. They all have their own, but whatever is highest on their value scale, they satisfy it through money.
Yeah.
Whatever you want this, that, or the other, it all comes to money, and gold is money now. It doesn't have to be gold, it just happens to be, but once it is, it is.
Yep.
And it's been that for many, many thousands of years, so there you go.
Yeah.
It's the Austrian, really Austrian thing.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Any more questions?
Before you talked about that according to Mises, the new money flows into goods and services, but there is another thing that is financial instrument. But with like bonds and obligation and other financial instruments, after that, who receives the money with that financial instrument doesn't put this money into goods and services, like bonds with government that put that money into pay the people, pay services and stuff.
Sure. Did you get that, Professor? So you said that von Mises said that the newly created credit goes to gets spent on the goods and services market, but there's a third class to consider, which is financial assets.
He didn't say that.
No, I'm saying you said that.
No.
Won't the inflation in the financial assets somehow find its way back into goods and services?
Oh yeah. That's absolutely right. But the government and the central bank wants this to come, if it cannot be avoided, it wants to come as late as possible. And why? Because the greater time span is between the fact of adding to the money supply and the reaction of prices of goods and services. fact can be obscured, causality can be blotted out, and people won't realize that there's a connection, as actually it did happen. Because today when they say inflation, originally inflation is a Latin word, comes from inflating, like a balloon. You blow air into it and then it gets larger. And the same with the money supply. You add to it, then you make it bloated. Prices rise. So the connection is obvious. The causality relationship is crystal clear. Used to be. But as it is now, it's completely obscured. People are blindfolded and they say, oh, well, increases money supply is one thing, which is beneficial because the government knows what it's doing, and these gentlemen at the helm, Ben Bernanke and his cronies, are competent, they are responsible, they are honorable, they know exactly what they are doing, so that's fine, let them do their thing. That's what they are hired, and that's what they... But, on the other hand, there is something like tectonic movement, something beyond our control, something act of God, like changes in climate or volcanic eruption. Inflation doesn't mean increase money supply anymore. It means prices rise because of cosmic forces beyond human control. There is nothing human beings or institutions can do to stop that. It's a curse, but nature imposed curse on human race. You see? That is the purpose behind. To put that time span between cause and effect, because people can be fooled so easily. Just increase this time span and then they completely lose their orientation. People will not realize that this causality and there is a responsibility, and this belongs to the government. The government creates increasing prices, wages, and runaway inflation, if it comes to that, or even deflation, and that is what I will have to talk about more in this context. So, you see the point? Yes, indeed, there is a time span, but that's on purpose. That's part of the evil design of the government and the central bank. They want that. They want to fool you, fool me, and fool everybody, that there's no causal relationship between increasing money supply and rising prices, or wages, or cost of living, or depreciation of currency. These are cosmic events, have nothing to do with government interference. That's what they want.
Okay, but where's the difference between your view and Mises' view about the increase, the flow of the new money? I mean, at the end, if there are new money and I get it, I can consume now or later. So if I put it in a bond, the government can spend it now or later. So it's kind of the same thing. Or
there's no difference with what Professor's not disagreeing with what von Mises said.
Oh.
It's just he's adding a third thing to it, and the new money goes into that third thing first, and there's a lag before it goes into the other two things.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's all. It's making a refinement to what von Mises said. That's all.
Okay. Another question about the limit of the increase of real bills. You say that 60 real bills and 40 gold. I don't get it, this issue.
Why that particular ratio?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's arbitrary, obviously. That's not my invention. It's written in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, and I think it's originally in the charter of the Reichsbank of Germany, going back to the 19th century. Something like, I don't know exactly what year the Reichsbank was established, but it had a charter. And I think they borrowed this from the charter of the Reichsbank in the United States. What's the name of this German banker who came to the United States and he was very active?
Warburg. Is it Warburg?
Warburg, yeah. And actually there was a brother too. So it was a banking family, very influential Jewish banking family in Germany. And I'm saying Jewish just to express my admiration, because the Jewish people have their wisdom going back to at least 5,000 years, and part of it has to do with money. As you know, the Jews were not allowed to enter professions in Europe for hundreds of years, including medicine and law and this and that and that. But they were allowed to deal in money because dealing in money involved lending and borrowing and interest. And that was a prohibition, both religious and secular prohibition against lending money. So let the Jews do it, and that was the attitude, and the Jews did it, and did it very well. So there was a great tradition in Jewish families, and the Warburg family is an example. I have only good words to say about the Warburgs. Now, I do say this because there is a book, well, there are lots of books which picture the Federal Reserve Act as the document of devil. It's the source of all evils, and so on and so forth. And that's not my view. I don't share this. I think the Reichsbank of Germany and transplanted into the United States by the Warburg family had very good points. And one of these good points was their treatment of the bills, the real bills. So I don't know where it came from. I think it came from the Reichsbank, that they said that the minimum of 40% of the assets of the central bank has to be gold coins or gold bullion, and the rest is not nothing, as the fractional banking denomination may suggest. No, the rest, that 60%, is the next best thing to gold. And what's the next best thing to gold? Is self-liquidating paper maturing into gold coins in a few weeks' time. No more than 90 days, no more than 13 weeks, which is not very far away. It's just the length of the season of the year. And this may be arbitrary, and it's not for us to decide here, but that's written in the Federal Reserve Act, that the assets of the Federal Reserve banks have to consist of 40% gold and the rest in self-liquidating paper, to the exclusion of government bonds. That's a total ban. Banknotes, deposits must not be backed by government bonds as an asset, the balance sheet of the central bank. They must be balanced by either gold or real bills maturing into gold. So one has to be very careful in using the term fractional banking and just say this is a fraud, because the goldsmiths